Right, here we go. We're looking at some prepared slides of the life cycle of a Scyphozoan jellyfish. Specifically, this is Aurelia, affectionately known as the moon jelly. And you've seen some pictures of adult moon jellies in previous labs, but I wanted to reinforce that concept of the biphasic life cycle. What you're looking at is a prepared slide of a larva of Aurelia. When jellyfish get together and make a special hug, Mrs. Egg gets fertilized by Mr. Sperm. I'm assuming you understand how that works. You're all adults here. And the fertilized egg divides into 2, 4, 8, 16, ... into a little creeping larva called a planula. And you're looking at a planula larva right here. It's been stained. It's not naturally this shocking pink. And there's not really a great deal to see. There's no gut. This is basically just a flat mass of cells. We'll focus up and down on it a little bit, but there's not that much detail. And the planula just goes creeping around and eventually settles in a place and transforms into the polyp generation. And the fancy name for a jellyfish polyp is Scyphostoma. And this is a prepared slide of a Scyphostoma. And this being quite a bit bigger than the polyp, I'm going to go to a lower power. And there it is right there. In fact, it's really too big to get the whole thing on the whole thing on in the field of view. So I'll just kind of move back and forth. We're looking at the aboral end. That's the end away from the mouth, just pointed. You can see a few details of the septa inside the polyp. There's 4 of them, dividing the polyp up into 4 compartments. And then at the oral end right there, you can see the little stubby tentacles. And this is a critter that just, sits around and does its polyp thing, feeds on whatever prey it can sting with those tentacles and engulf. We can see a little bit more detail of the tentacles here, kind of contracted. If we zoom around a little bit, up and down. And going back there, the whole body is in this contracted state. It's pretty much cone-shaped. And I'm not sure what else to tell you. This is the polyp stage of Aurelia's life cycle. And when this matures, it starts reproducing asexually. And the fancy name for the process is strobilation. So what we've got in view here is an Aurelia strobila. We're looking at the aboral end away from the mouth. It seems a little dim. I'm going to try to enlighten it a bit. So that's the end away from the mouth. And as we move away from it, here's the oral end. And yeah, unfortunately, again, this is a little bit too big to fit into the field of view. This eyepiece microscope's field of view is a little more narrow than what you'd see with your own eyes. But I hope you can get the general idea that the aboral end is narrow and there's a little disc where it attaches to whatever it's attached to. Looks a little bit torn up right there. The polyp kind of has a stalk. I think the kind of ribbony thing that you're seeing might be one of the polyp septa. And then the oral end is larger. And if you look, right there's the oral end, and there is the oral end is starting to divide in a plane that's perpendicular to the long axis. So what we have here is a polyp that's dividing like this. So there's the tentacles. And then there we have that transverse division. And what is going to happen is that this little division right here, this thing that I'm focusing on right there, is going to break off and go off and swim away on its own, and it's going to be a little baby jellyfish. The term for this is, again, strobilation, and a polyp that is a strobila, which is what we're looking at here. Some of these things can look almost like a whole stack of dishes, stacked one on top of the other, where the dish on the top of the stack is ready to break off and go swimming on its own. So I'm only seeing one little, strobila right here, but there could be a lot more. This thing is going to may bud off little medusas repeatedly. I'm not sure how many it can produce, but it can produce potentially quite a lot. So there you've got the tentacles, right? There's a mouth in there. And then this little part right here is about to break off, and the polyp will then bud off another one, and so on. It will keep dividing perpendicular to that long axis, budding off jellyfish asexually. And each one of those little, dishes in the stack that buds off goes and swims away on its own. And we have one of these as well. And the fancy name for one of these is an ephyra, Ephyra. And unfortunately, I can't ever see one of these without wanting to sing, Ephyra, Ephyra, my heart's on fire, Ephyra. It'd be really cool if I could find this guy. Here we go. Here is the ephyra heaving into view. This is what one of those little divisions of the polyp looks like once it breaks off and starts swimming away on its own. This is a baby jellyfish. You're looking at the center of it right now, and that kind of diamond-shaped area in the center is the mouth. And surrounding it, those darker areas are 4 oral arms. I'm not going to sing that song because I already did it, and I'm not sure I've got the high notes for it this morning. But you might remember that some jellyfish have extremely long oral arms. I think I remember reading that some of the really big jellyfish can have oral arms that extend something like 100 feet. They can be quite long. In Aurelia, they tend to be a lot smaller, but prey gets manipulated with the oral arms and pushed into the mouth. The mouth opens into a stomach, and the stomach is taking up most of this field of view, and you can see it's starting to develop canals branching off. In fact, there's a branch of the stomach going down each one of these 8 little flap-like structures. I think they're called the marginal lappets. And there's a branch of the gut going down each one of them. As this thing grows, the gaps between those 8 projections are going to get kind of filled in. Aurelia is called the moon jellyfish because when it's an adult, it's an almost perfect circle. But at this stage, you've still got these dents in between the lappets. But you can see, running from the top of your field of view straight down, you can see an extension of the gut. And at the edge of each one of these lappets, there's a darker spot, which I'll go ahead and zoom in on a little bit. There we go. So that's the edge of one of those lappets. And that darker spot that you see, this kind of, I don't know, maybe comma-shaped thing right in the center of the field of view, that's called a rhopalium, spelled Rhopalium. And that's a sense organ. In particular, it is a balance organ. And a portion of this rhopalium has or will develop a very small little sphere of calcium carbonate inside a larger sac. And the whole thing works, as I described in an earlier lecture, kind of like putting a golf ball inside a beach ball. You know, if you imagine you could do that and you rotate the beach ball, the golf ball will always roll down to the lowest point. Well, the balance organ in the rhopalium works the same way. The balance organ is called the statocyst. I think that's the upper part. And there may also be light-sensitive spots in a rhopalium. In the box jellies, the rhopalium actually may have those eyes that we talked about, those strangely complicated eyes for a jellyfish. There may be chemical and vibration sense organs and things like that as well. So, yeah, this is still not sexually mature. The gonads will eventually develop in next to the stomach. There's going to be 4 gonads surrounding it, but you can't really see them just yet. But when this jellyfish has become sexually mature, the male will release sperm, fertilize the female's eggs. The female will actually carry the eggs on her oral arms for a while until they hatch, and out pops a planula, and around goes the great circle of life. If you've got your box of prepared slides, and I should mention that we made the decision not to ship those out just because there's so many that are delicate and not easy to replace. So 3 of you don't have these, and that's okay. I'm not going to test you on anything that you could only see in the prepared slides. But you've got a hydrozoan in your prepared slide box called Obelia that actually does the same thing. In fact, you can look at this on your own, or, you know, I could just show you so that everyone, even those of you who don't have a slide box, can see this for yourself. Obelia is a hydrozoan, so it's not a scyphozoan, but most hydrozoans also have this biphasic life cycle. Now, there's a chance we might actually see one that doesn't. If we get to see the freshwater cnidarian genus Hydra, which we might next week, that's one that doesn't have a biphasic life cycle. Hydra is kind of weird. But this is a polyp colony of Obelia, and we're looking at a gastrozoid right there. That's a feeding polyp. You can clearly see the tentacles. The polyp is the pink part, and it's surrounded by this blue staining inorganic, well, not inorganic, but it's non-living, this blue staining chitin or chitin-like substance surrounding the polyp and the stems that connect the polyps. And you can see that in this particular species, not all have this, but in this particular species, you've got this kind of wine glass shape or cup-shaped extension that surrounds the polyp and that the polyp can withdraw into. That's called the perianth. The polyp's got tentacles, and in the middle of the tentacles, you can see this kind of pear-shaped, darker pink staining blob in the center of the polyp. That's got the mouth at the tip, and it happens to be called the manubrium. Again, that is Latin for the grip of a sword. which tells me that the 18th century biologists that named all of this stuff were quite clearly on drugs, because this doesn't look like a sword to me, but that's what it's called. Anyway, so you can trace connections between the polyps. They have these connections called stolons that branch. So we can trace the stolon down here, and here we can see more feeding polyps. The stolon's torn in a couple of places. Here's two feeding polyps, one on top of the other. The stolons are connecting them all. And then down here, we've got a second kind of polyp. You can see that this one does not have tentacles. This one has a perianth that completely surrounds it except for a little narrow kind of tubular opening up at the top. This is called a gonozoid, and it doesn't feed. It gets its food from the gastrozoids because digested food is constantly passing through the stolons to all parts of the colony. What this one is doing is just creating these little buds. And in this one, the buds are these little kind of oval blobs. This zoid kind of look like it's made of several little kind of ovalish round blobs, all kind of stuck together. Each one of those is a new medusa. And when they're mature, each medusa will break off and push its way out of that little tube-shaped opening up there at the top and go off swimming away on its own. So there's actually a second gonozoid right there, and you can see that little tube-shaped opening at the top, and all of these little roundish blobby things are new medusas in different stages of development. And if we go down here, okay, there's a third gastrozoid right there. And okay, there's a fourth gastrozoid that I guess fell off. And that one really clearly shows you, this one's broken away, but it clearly shows you those little buds that are eventually going to push out and go off and swim on their own as medusas. So if we go back through the colony there, we can see there's the gastrozoids again. All of these connected through these hollow stems or stolons that pass food through the entire colony. And colonies of hydrozoans like this can actually get fairly big. I have seen them growing on places like dock pilings. One particular place in Florida that I once visited, where the pilings on the dock and some styrofoam floats and things that were floating in the water were just absolutely covered in hydrozoan polyp colonies like this. And they were also home to lots of other animals that like living in and among this stuff, which looks a little bit like a brown moss when it grows. And if you take marine biology in the fall, we are going to do a few in-person mini labs, although we don't have a formal lab time. And one of the things I did last time I taught it, and then I'm going to do again, is order some live hydrozoans and just have everybody poke through samples of it, looking through the diverse ecosystem that builds up, because you get snails and you get little shrimp and you get things called skeleton shrimp. You get all kinds of critters living in and among a hydrozoan polyp colony. And real quick, we'll look at the medusa. This is what pops out of those gonozoids and goes merrily swimming off on its own way. And that's what that looks like. That is a baby hydrozoan jellyfish. Again, you've got a kind of squarish stomach. Let me see. I think there's a second one in here. Give me one moment. Okay, there we go. We got two. Okay, you're looking at the kind of squarish stomach I'll zoom in on in a bit, and you can just barely see right now the makings of 4 radial canals coming off of that stomach in the middle. If we go looking here, what very commonly happens for some reason when we put these jellyfish on slides is that they tend to turn inside out. Think of an umbrella that's been in a very strong wind. Or think Marilyn Monroe in that famous photo, although don't think too much about her. We've got to concentrate here. Sorry. This is one that you're seeing from the side, and the bell has been turned inside out a bit. And what's hanging down from the bell, that thing that looks like a mushroom stalk, is called the manubrium, again, because somebody thought it looked like a sword handle. And I guess you could imagine reaching out and grasping this like a sword handle. The problem is your sword doesn't have any blade. But if you imagine a blade kind of sticking up at about the 2 o'clock direction, I guess it works. Anyway, the mouth is just at the tip of the manubrium. We don't have separate oral arms, but we do have this tube-like extension hanging down in the bell. The bell there has been kind of bent backwards a little bit. And here you can't see the manubrium because you're looking straight down on it. But we can increase the magnification just a skosh. And when we get it into focus, there we are. We are looking straight down the manubrium. As we shift through the focus, you're looking at the bell, and morning, Garrett. You just tuned in. We're looking right now at a prepared slide showing a hydrozoan medusa, the medusa stage of the life cycle. We've looked at the other stages, but I'm recording this so you can pick this up later. The stomach is in the middle, and you can just barely see they're going out diagonally, so they are roughly at your like 2 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and 11 o'clock. I can just see traces of the 4 radial canals. There's a swelling at the base of each of the tentacles. In many hydrozoan medusas, there would be an eye spot there. And if we zoom in a bit more on the tentacles, there's that annoying pattern always shows up when I go to high power on this. But there's a tentacle. There's several. Okay, and it's hard for me to get this all in focus at one time. But if you look carefully and use your imagination and probably take drugs, just kidding. I'm not recommending that. I can promise you that I have never taken any controlled, illegal, recreational substance in my life, unless it was free. And this might actually work better under medium power. I'm sorry, the high power does not look very nice. Okay, there it's a little bit more clear. You can see the tentacles look kind of warty, like they've got little periodic swellings on them that stain a little bit more darkly. What each one of those is a group of nematocytes, the stinging cells. And when you get whole groups of stinging cells all together, that's called a nematocyte battery. And again, it's battery in the artillery sense. You know, a battery is a grouping of cannons that can all fire together. If you've ever been to an old fort, you might have several batteries, and each one is just a platform where you stick a whole bunch of cannons and start blasting. This is a battery in the same sense. It's a cluster of nematocysts. There's one last prepared slide we might as well look at while we're here. And those of you that got slide boxes can look at this for yourself. Those of you that didn't, it's okay. But there's a section through a critter called Physalia. And Physalia is the Portuguese man of war. This is one of those weird colonial hydrozoans in which the polyps are so closely integrated, they act like they're single individuals. And here we go. All right, we've kindly got to slice through one of these. Fairly complex structure there. But if we look over in this part and get the focus right, okay, I've still got the laptop screen where I can't see anything. I've got a new monitor that I can work from, but it's too bulky to carry around. So that's at home, which means I'm having a hard time getting the image really sharp. But this part is noteworthy because you can actually see nematocyst really well. Those round red berry-looking things are nematocysts, the actual stings. They've got different shapes in different taxa. Here they are almost perfect spheres. In the anemones that we're going to look at, they are kind of banana-shaped. There's lots of them in this particular slide. And there we go. There we've got, that's a cross-section through the specialized structure of the polyp that has a lot of little leafy extensions called bracts. That's what you're seeing. But the main attraction here is the stings, because recall that the Portuguese man of war is very painful and can actually kill you. You'd have to get a lot of tentacle on your body to get killed by a Portuguese man of war, but it has happened. So I'm going to see if I can focus in on one of those nematocysts, and that will actually make a nifty transition to lab. Okay, I've got one there. And again, I can't see perfectly well what I'm doing, but I'm focusing up and down. And yeah, it may be a little bit tricky to make out, but what's inside each one of these is a coiled filament. Let me see if I can find one that's a little bit more clear. Kind of block the focus for just a second. Okay, you're looking straight at this one. And again, I'm not sure I'm able to make this come out as well as I would have liked, but there is something inside each of these. And what it is a coiled up nematocyst filament. That's the part that will actually discharge and stick to the prey, penetrate its body, and inject venom. And virtually all cnidarians have this, although most of them can't actually break human skin. Most of them aren't that dangerous. So when I look through the scope with my own eyes, I can see it. I don't know how good a job I am of making it appear to y'all. But if I kind of do that back and forth and squint, I can at least convince myself that I'm able to see that coiled up filament inside the Portuguese man of war nematocyst. All right, so I'm going to pause recording there. and give you folks 20 minutes to go get some coffee or whatever it is you do. And when we reconvene, I'm going to torment some live sea anemones for your pleasure. At least I hope they're live.